Hey guys, Darren Carr, your coach of Wise Ocean Pods, and welcome back to another episode of the Club Preview Series. On today's episode, we are talking about St Kilda. Let's get into it.
All the pain.
So St Kilda have been a very fantasy relevant team for us for the past few years, where they play this really nice game style, which allows a lot of their players to rack up the fantasy pill and really score a nice fantasy score. And this extends across a lot of their lines. You're talking the back line, you got your Sinclairs and your Wanganing Maliras. We even saw the likes of the Riley Bonner last year, who did really well for us as a mid-pricer. It also goes into the midfield where you got Jack Steele that had Brad Crouch there previously. We've got a few others that will be relevant this year, with a few of those, with Brad Crouch particularly being out. And even the ruckman, Royal Marshall, we can't go past him. He is the number one fantasy player at the moment, and that isn't uncommon for him. So they play a really nice game style, and they're going to be continue to be very, very relevant for us in 2025. But what did they do in 2024? They finished 12th in probably what was a bit of a disappointing year. They finished 6th in 2023, so a bit of a decline from where they were at. And that's probably about what I expect them to do in 2025. Just they really didn't bring in too much talent. We'll talk about one particular person in a minute, but really they lost a bit of talent as well in Josh Battle. They lost some depth with Tom Campbell going to Melbourne. Brad Crouch obviously retired. They delisted Riley Bonner and Tim Membry as well, and even Seb Ross, which was a bit of a surprise one for me. So there's been a bit of a change in terms of their list, and probably hurts their depth a little bit more. So I'm probably expecting a little bit more of a decline, but I still think they'll be around that sort of 10 to 14 mark in 2025. So I don't think too much is going to change in terms of their way of playing the game. I think they're still going to be quite relevant in terms of fantasy. So we've got to look at a host of names here in for our starting teams. And it's not uncommon. I think it would be a pretty common scenario where there's at least three St Kilda players in every team right now, with the ownership of these guys that we'll talk about in a second. They're just so fantasy relevant, and probably one of the most fantasy relevant teams this year by far to start with. But before we get into the players, they went to the draft to pick 8 and 9 after getting that compo pick for Josh Battle, so they got the 10th pick as well, and they picked up Toby Travaglia, hopefully I said that right, and Alex Tarun, if I got that right. Hopefully I did, but we'll talk about at least one of those guys a little bit later to look at some of the fantasy numbers, and hopefully he is someone that we can select in our starting squad. But now let's get into the players that we need to talk about, and that is to start with. We're going to start with Rowan Marshall. You got to start at the top. Rowan Marshall is by and far one of the best ruckmen that we've had in a long time. Why is this not loading now? Come on. Back to back, he's gone above 115, 116 last year, rounding up 117 last year, 117 this year. So he is a super consistent ruckman. Like I said, by and far the best ruckman in the competition right now. With just the way that he goes about it, he just doesn't matter if he's in and around the contest. He just knows how to rack the pill up around the ground. Now that the fact that there's no Campbell to worry about, which is always the joke that went around the fantasy community, Dum always had his name in the emergency list. Now that's probably behind him as such, because now they're going to be relying on a much younger player to really depend on as an emergency. And we'll wait and see what happens with that, whether they want to expose such a young kid to that sort of environment of the AFL and start developing. Royal Marshall's only 29, I believe, so he's not like he's entering the end of his career. He's still very much in his prime. And I'm not expecting a huge decline from him unless his role dramatically shifts, which I don't really see. I know there's a bit of rumours going around in the preseason so far that he may spend more time forward. I just don't see where they get the facility to do that with, who's going to be rucking for them. I know that they've got a couple of ruckmen that they've recruited, but again, they're very, very young. I know a recent one they just recruited, which was Harry Boyd. He is a 26-year-old, so that's potentially a bit of a concern, but it would take a lot to step into the AFL system after only being in the South Australian League. I can't remember the name of it right now. But we'll have to wait and see that one. I don't think it's going to be too much of a concern at this point in time, and I think he's a pretty safe pick to start the season. Now, the argument I want to make that why we should start him a little bit is that he had a few injury-affected games in 2024, if I can bring that up. It's very poor branding by me. Particularly these two. Round 6, round 7, he scored a 62 and a 73. He had a bit of a knee concern where it wasn't enough for him to come off, but you could really see in the way that he played the game, he was really struggling with and just playing through the pain. So that's particularly why he scored quite low in those matchups, and they were really easy matchups in the fact that it was Tim English and the likes of a Sweet or a Soldo who were giving up many points at the time, and he was expected to go absolutely ballistic. So it was unfortunate timing, particularly for me. I did trade him in at that time, and that backfired pretty quickly. But that means his potential value, right? So if you remove those scores, he averaged 122 for the year. So that means he's 5 points on the upside there, which, again, can we realistically expect the player to average over 120? We have seen it in the past, but it's been a very few select players that have done that, and it would mean that he'd have to be pretty needs to stay away from injury for the entire season, which is quite unlikely, particularly for a ruckman that is always in the contest. You're up against some pretty big boys that are going to hurt you every now and then. So it's not uncommon to see these ruckmen get a few knee injuries as such. So probably 120. While it's in question, it's probably unlikely. I think he's probably fairly priced. Like I said, he went back-to-back 117s in the last 2 years. So there's evidence to say that he is priced fairly and that we shouldn't expect too much of a decline unless there is a role change. There was also another low score of 63, and that was against Maxi Gawn. I think, again, he just really struggled against Max. Max is a really good ruckman. Just really shut him down, worked him to the ground. So those two went to head-to-head pretty well. So that's probably the only really letdown score. But besides that, there was only 3 occasions where he went under 100 for the entire year. That was against Darcy Cameron and then against Williams, which was unexpected, to be honest. Williams was an easier matchup. So definitely an unusual game in that sense. But besides that, he had a phenomenal year, and I expect him to continue that way. Another reason I would want to start him and why I'm heavily looking at starting him is that his run to start the season is quite phenomenal. Let me just get the data up for you here. So he goes Crows, so obviously O'Brien there, the Cats, Tigers, Port, and GWS, and then that also goes into the Dogs. So 3 of those are very good matchups, being the Cats, Tigers, and Dogs. Sweet's also questionable, and Briggs is also a questionable one. On his day, he can be quite easy as well. But I'll read out the scores that he had last year against those ruckmen, particularly in order. So he scored a 150 against O'Brien. He scored a 131 and a 118 against Stanley. A 140 and a 136 against Nank. A 119 against Sweet, and a 138 against the Dogs. Against Briggs. Sorry. And that also follows up with the likes of English, where he did also score quite well. He didn't score quite well because that was his injured game, so I didn't really count that one in there too much. That was a 62. But we all know English is quite an easy ruckman to score against. Maybe a little bit of a change coming in the new year. With looks like English has switched it up to his ruck craft, so we'll have to wait and see on how that affects his scoring against ability. But to say the least, that is a phenomenal run to start the season, and there's no evidence to say that Rowan Marshall will go decrease in price to start the season, unlike another ruckman, which I've discussed, like a Cherry, who has a tougher run. So he probably has more of a lighter run to start the season, which we can probably bank that he's going to be a good captain option to start the year for us. The only concern I have, particularly, was probably more reflecting on me, is that I have PTSD of starting these higher price players. I started with Bont last year, and that obviously backfired in my face quite quickly to start the season. Starting at that 117 price tag last year, and he dropped by 10 points the next year. So while he was a hold all year, it was not a pleasant one to start with, and really didn't get my season off to the start I wanted. And he really didn't become that captain option that I really looked for at the start of the season, even though he had a great run that I looked at. So you can't always rely based on their run to start the season, their fixture, but it's definitely a good indication of what they can do. But yeah, so that's all I really had to say about Ron Marshall. I'm really bullish on what he can do. Obviously, he's a really good fantasy scorer, and I think he's definitely one that we got to keep a close eye on with what he does with his role to start the season. The next person we'll talk about is also quite highly earned, and that is Jack Sinclair. Now, he is priced at 102. Been a super consistent fantasy scorer for us in fantasy for a while. Look at these consistent. He's been a 102 guy for the last 3 years. Before that, he was playing a different role. So he's really taken this role and just absolutely gone with it. Really had a mixture 2024 where these roles, he was playing a lot, off half back, and then he went full time mid, and a bit of a mixture in between there as well. So what I really want to see him do in 2025 is play this full-time half-back role, which I'm expecting him to do. With the inclusions of the likes of Philippou and McRae into that midfield, I don't see the need for a Jack Sinclair off the half-back, in the mid anymore, and I expect him to play that full half-back role and be that main distributor back there, which we've seen, the likes of Bonner do last year. And because they're really crying out for that sort of player. They've got Wangani Malera, but he's a bit on the taller side. They really need that speed to go through there. And I think Jack Sinclair can absolutely provide that. And I want to see a bit of small bump. Like, I know we picked these players because they have a little bit of potential, right? And I think there's potential here with Jack Sinclair to take his game just that little bit better. 5 points here and there is enough when you price this high, just to pump you up into the top three in this line. And I think he can do that, with a small bump and see kick-ins. Obviously, I can show you the kick-in tally here. Sorry, I'm doing my research for the Sydney Swans at the moment, and that's why it's still up there. Just looking at his numbers, it was very up and down depending on what role he is playing. I think that's going to be a lot more consistent, particularly with Riley Bonner out of the side now and delisted. That's obviously a huge difference it'll make between, a Wangani Malera and a Jack Sinclair. So I expect both of them to probably get a small bump in kick-ins, but it won't be a huge amount. I mainly think that the bump's going to come from this main distributor role, a full consistent role that he can expect to know what to do, rolling up to the stoppages on the halfback, being that defensive midfielder. And the other thing I wanted to look at was that when Bonner wasn't in the side, he averaged 107. So I can show you his scores here. Where are they? So, that's not him. So Riley Bonner's just down here. He missed round 17. He got 102. Then he scored a 116, 102, and a 110 when Bonner wasn't in the side. So that's when he particularly played full-time defense. You can see that here, if I can find his name again. Particularly in those last 3 games, he just absolutely went halfback, no CBAs anymore. And I think that's what's going to be the best role for him in 2025. And easily is going to be a top 6 defender for us, I think. The only other concern I have with him is he is a bit of a tag target because he is such a good player and a main distributor for them. So that is a bit of a concern, but you're going to get that with a lot of these top 6 guys. You're talking to Whitfield, you're talking to Sheasel, they're all in a competition. And I wouldn't say either of those are particularly value at this point in time, whereas I genuinely feel that Jack Sinclair is value. So here's one to keep an eye on. We'll keep moving on. Don't want to waste too much time. Jack McRae, I didn't say his name off the bat, but he was the only inclusion that Saints brought into their side this year, after being bevoed for the last probably 2 or 3 seasons. Why is this not working? Come on. Jack McRae is priced at 71. 732k, listed as a forward, a pure forward, which is just crazy to me to think that that's capable. He's way down on his fantasy best, as we all know. I don't think I need to sell this guy to you too much because I think he's one of the easiest locks that we're going to get for this season, particularly. But he has never averaged under 90 in his career since his rookie season. Like, you discount the rookie season, played minimal games, didn't really have much of a role. But since then, he has not averaged under 90, which is kind of ridiculous. You discount the COVID season that obviously hasn't been adjusted, but he is just in the fantasy gun. He knows how to rack the pill, and we've already got confirmation that he's going to be going into a full-time mid-roll, which is the time that suits him. I expected it's going to be, a 70% CBA role, and that's when we've seen him average these massive 120s, 115s. This is just the guy that he is when he has the right role. So I'd be quite shocked to see him not average over 100. Like that, I just think that's pretty much a locked-in guarantee if he gets the right role. 70% CBAs. He's in a nice team. Like, he's just gone from one good team to another in terms of their fantasy output as a team collective. So I think that only, again, doubles down that he's going to fit in quite well. I just say lock him in. It's just a matter of is he going to be F1 for the year, or is he going to be F2? Behind, to say, Caleb Daniel, or are they going to be roughly together on that sort of range of like 105? I'd say so. Absolutely lock him in. I don't think I need to sell him on too much, and I think he's one of the easier ones to pick. I know there's some other people that think he's a bit more of a concern just because maybe he's past it or whatever. I just think he slots in and he absolutely goes ham for us, and easily puts 30 points on top of his price tag at the current point. So lock him in. Easy one to slot in there for us. The only other question is if he is F1 for us. As I'm saying, like in terms of the starting pick, is he your F1 like in that spot, or is he F2? I think most structures currently he's the F2, and you're trying to pay up for another forward option that's potentially closer to being that top 6 forward. For me, I'm not super against making the F1. I think like you're gonna want him either way. It's just whether you can find another cheap guy that can be in your forward line as a cheaper, say, an F5, or even if you put running a rookie in the forward line. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. The next player is Matheus Filippo, and he had a shocker to start the year, to be honest. He didn't do well at all. I can show you his scores to start the season. He's way down here. Just looking at it, he was like averaging 45 through the first half of the season. He eventually got dropped from the senior side, went back to the VFL and worked on his midfield craft absolutely just became this guy that we all thought he could be. What his junior numbers came on. You've got to remember he is a top 10 pick only a couple of seasons ago. I can show you his VFL numbers in the time that he was back in the VFL. Pretty much consistently over 100 besides the first game. Even in the game in between, he just absolutely racks when he has the right role, and I think that's what he's going to have in 2025. With scores, he just came back with sorry, I cut the corner there. Came back in round 17 and absolutely went bang with scores of 117, 93, 96, and 119. Sorry, I was clicking things there. And he was playing a majority CBA role, 60%. Looking at that there, quite close to 60%. It was only that last game where he dropped out of the CBAs and had 0 CBAs, which probably is where the concerns start for me particularly, is with, Jack Steele being number 1 midfielder. Then you've got Windhager that seemingly was number 2 throughout the season quite comfortably when he wasn't injured. Paddy Dow probably don't consider too much in that consideration. I think he quite easily gets pushed down the list and comes depth with some of the inclusions, with the Jack McRae obviously coming into that role. That's already 3 midfielders. Is there room for the likes of a Filippo around these guys, Does Hunter Clark still get a gig in there? Does, obviously, Ross is now gone. Jones, does he still get a gig in the side? Maybe not. Obviously, Jack Sinclair, I've said, probably goes in the back half now. So I do still think there is some time for him, but maybe just not a full-time gig. like the 60% that we probably want to see. So I am probably a little bit down on what his potential could be from his 64. I don't think he's going to be this 100 averaging player that we saw in the back half of that season. I think I got to lower my expectations to maybe like an 80 sort of player, which I still think is absolutely enough to be a warrant a starting pick. I'm just not 100% sure that this is going to be a full-time midfield gig for him just yet. With the likes of Windhager, they seem to like to run him through there, being that sort of accountable defender. But potentially Steele could do that. You know, Steele's obviously a very capable tackling midfielder, and maybe he could leave the jobs of being the distributor to Jack McRae in the likes of Filippo. So there's still things to be unseen at St Kilda. We haven't really had much reports come from them just yet, but I'm really bullish on what Filippo can do in 2025. The next player I want to talk about, and probably is a bit more of a skeptical pick, but I am really liking what he has done in the past year, being a first-year player. Obviously has a really good background from fantasy point of view, and that is Ari Shoremaker, priced at 84, so just under 500k there as a defender. And the main reason I'm really keen on him is that the fact that, you know, Battle's now been traded and a Bonner's out. There's positions up in this team, right? And I really think Showmaker could make his spot and make his name in this team if given the opportunity. Like I said, he's an elite fantasy scorer when playing in defense. So I can show you his VFL scores right here: 115, 68, 100, 105, 83, 90, 90, 110. Like, he's just so good at being that distributor of halfback. Just has an elite kick as well, which would only benefit St Kilda. And I don't see a world where they're not going to give him more game time. It's just with, you know, is he too similar to the likes of a Wanganeen Malira, being that sort of taller defender, being a bit on the distribution side. Took a few kick-ins as well, which is probably more of a thing that I'm quite bullish on. You know, he instantly came into the side and took 3 kick-ins, which is kind of mind-blowing to think that they trust him that quickly with that sort of caliber, especially when you're talking about a Wanganeen Malura and a Jack Sinclair around him. Why would they not just go to them instead of a rookie making his first game, you know? So that really shows that they really like what he can do with the ball in hand. So I'm quite keen on what he can bring in 2025. Obviously priced very cheaply. I think if he gets full-time game time, you know, playing off the halfback in a really good team as the Saints are, I think he's at least a 70. And that's, you know, 22 points of upside, which makes him a pretty good pick to start the team in what is a really struggling defensive line so far this season. We're all looking for value, particularly one that doesn't have the early buy. Ari Shawmaker has his name written all over, so he's one I'm heavily considering to start. I just really want to see what the preseason games bring if he's in that A team, because from the reports that I have seen, he is currently playing in the B team, so that is concerns already. I just don't know if he's going to be one that breaks into the side instantly. And even in the best 22, they've got on him as an emergency, which is not always something to go off of. But they do have an Anthony Caminiti in the back line, which he's a forward, so I don't understand how that works. And he didn't play a lick of defense in his time, so I don't understand how they came to that conclusion. But that could easily be switched around, in my opinion. So he's definitely one I'm having a look for in the new season. So keep an eye on him. He's one that I has spent some time on my side for sure. And to finish off the video, we'll talk about Toby Travaglia. He's probably the only rookie that I'll talk about in this video. He is priced at 319k. He's a halfback defender. Bit of on the smaller side, so 187, so smaller. Got pace and good foot skills, so I can see him potentially getting some game time in 2025. His averages in the under 18s and the talent league shows that he's capable of being a fantasy scorer with averages of 83 and an 86. I just don't know, like I said, you know, if Ari Shawmaker can't make it into the side, is this guy going to be able to break into the side? And that's something I'm not 100% sure of just yet. Like I said, they probably need another speedster on the back line. They've got Jack Sinclair, but really when you're looking at this other list, you know, you got your Wilkie and your Howard and your Stock probably being your main intercepting and key defenders, so they're not providing much speed. Manganini Malira does have a bit of speed, but not the probably breaking pace that you're really looking for. Can Toby Travaglia provide that potentially? So definitely want to keep an eye on. It's also nice that he has defender mid status, so definitely one you want to keep an eye on. And like I said, he's currently playing in the twos team, so unlikely, but definitely want to keep an eye on. I think I'll sort of do it today for today's video, guys. Hopefully you got some decent names out of that, and we'll keep an eye on throughout the preseason. We're still a little while away, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed. And again, if you have any questions, please go on my bio and go to my QU link and ask me any questions that you got there. So if not, please subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.